Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the fulfilling work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit servicenow.com.
Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere, nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to a very special episode of the Film Stories podcast.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew. As always, that's everything you need to know about me. The aim of the podcast, though, well, it's given away by the title. I'm here to talk of the stories of films, and I tend to talk about development stories, production stories, marketing stories, release stories, all the ingredients, really, that go towards making the films that we know and sometimes love. Just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. The films I tend to cover on this podcast lean more towards the mainstream than anything else. They're films I'm interested in or invested in to some degree. Try not to do snark. I try not to punch down. This podcast is a celebration of cinema and a real appreciation that somehow, films manage to get made. What you happened upon here is one of my occasional special episodes of the podcast where I bring in a filmmaker to talk about their latest release and or their body of work. You are getting a bit of both here because I'm really delighted to be joined by the Chief Creative Officer of Walt Disney Animation Studios, the Oscar-winning writer and director Jared Bush. He was in the UK to talk about the release of Moana 2, which is in cinemas as this podcast is landing, so that's primarily where a bunch of our conversation is centred around. But as you're about to hear, we're going to go in and around the industry, in and around Jared Bush's own career as well. There's not too much setup you need to know. A name Amy is dropped in at one point. Amy Ashley is a brilliant person working at Disney in the US who helped set the interview up, who I was talking to before, so her name just slips in just very, very quickly. Other than that, I think the rest of it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to set things up with a clip from the trailer from Moana 2. You'll be able to hear my conversation with Jared Bush, the other side of this.
You wanted to come this time.
You were gone forever.
It was 3 days.
Where are we going?
Before Maui stole Te Fiti's heart, our ancestors wanted to connect our island to all the people of the entire ocean. It's my job as a wayfinder to finish what they started.
Moana, show our people just how far we'll go.
This is a call from the ancestors.
Hidden in a terrible storm, it's an ancient island. Setting foot on its sands would break the curse, bring our people together again.
I know what I have to do. Maui, I could really use your help.
That was a clip from Moana 2, and I'm delighted to be joined by royalty. I have the Chief Creative... No, we're going with this. I have the Chief Creative Officer. What a title. For the second year running on this podcast, I've got the Chief Creative Officer of Walt Disney Animation Studios. It's Jared Bush. Hello.
Simon, how are you?
I am alive. How are you?
I am also alive. We're doing great.
Great. We've got 45 minutes to discuss our mortality, which is quite a niche. I mean, Jared Bush, are you a believer in sliding doors moments? Because
I am.
Yeah. I've been researching you because the way these interviews go from my point of view is we sit in a room for a little bit and wait, and so you do the last minute searching just to see if there's anything that you've missed.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
So if it's not a trap. Don't look scared. But I'm just curious.
Wait for whatever this is. By the way, telling me not to be scared.
I know,
makes
it's a great setup. That's a brilliant setup, isn't it? So in 2007, New Line Cinema pick up Mancation.
Oh, wow.
For which I've just read the synopsis, which I won't read out on a Disney related podcast. But and the year before, you'd done a rom-com called Save the Date. And around the same time, you were doing a film called Adrenaline for Radar Pictures. None of these three films got made in the end, but it was when
Thanks for bringing that up. Thank you for telling me that.
Oh, right. Well, it's worked out, hasn't it? One of us is in a luxury London hotel and it's not me, right? Right. But if any one of those three films had happened, it's just like the curve of your career just could have gone off in a completely different direction. So, I mean, there is a question in this because I'm just kind of curious at moments like this. 2006, 2007, presumably you're sending spec scripts out. You're trying to get a movie made. You get really, really close. And then what brings you to here? How does that end up with the person in front of me now?
Well, first off, you're the first person that ever asked me about those scripts. So kudos to you on your research.
You say that. I'm going to go and read them now. I'm going to go and track them down.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Interesting. What's funny is that at Disney Animation, I started working there in 2011. I got hired to work there originally for Zootopia. When I first began at Disney Animation, Zootopia was a very different type of story. It was set on a spy film on an island, which I loved. They had read one of my spec scripts that was like that. It was a very I'd say a hard R spec script, but so I was curious why they wanted to read that one. I was like, I have other things that are maybe more in the pocket of Disney Animation, and they said no, we want this one, and I couldn't understand it. But come to figure out, there was a lot of character work in those stories. So I think something that I've always really, really loved is character work. Now, you can change the language and the subject matter in character work, but ultimately, I think something I've always really enjoyed is the psychology of characters, what that means when you get two characters and you thrust them together in circumstances that are extraordinary. And that's something that Disney Animation does the best. I think it's certainly in a two-hander. You have, characters from different parts of the world or different planets, whatever that is, and you want to spend time with them. And so I think that's weirdly how that worked out for me at Disney Animation. The other piece of this is I also worked in sitcom television, which is highly collaborative, and animation at Disney Animation is the most collaborative environment I've ever been in. So weirdly, I had a lot of experiences that added up perfectly to suiting me well for Disney Animation. And as you said, I could never have guessed that would work out that way. But it's 13 years later, and I couldn't be more excited.
So you gave an interview, I can't remember the exact one I was reading earlier, about 10, 15 years ago, where because writing it strikes me as your first love. I might be misreading that, but that seems to be your way. And you talked in there about how it's easier to go completely out there with a joke and just kind of bring it back. And I just wonder, going back to those scripts that you were writing, and again, I won't read the synopses or anything like that. It's just interesting how on the surface, they look a million miles away from what you're doing now. But is it the same kind of process? You fire your writing out there and then just pull it back. You go hugely ambitious with the first go.
Yeah, I'm always one to say, and we do this at Disney Animation all the time. And it's critical to push the boundaries. If you self-limit on any level, sometimes you do it too much and you never kind of achieve something that could surprise somebody or mean something to somebody, or it's just a more hopefully like a joke specifically that appeals to all ages. And so I'd say, I think that's always been part of something I've tried to do. Most people know when you write a joke into a script that all right, that one's never going to make it. That one will never be there. But sometimes in animation, early on, you will put a line of dialogue in there, not because you think it'll make the final cut, but because it may give the story artist an idea, or it may give the animators an idea. They'll go, oh, well, obviously we can't say that, but I like the tone of something like that, and maybe we could try something different. So I think as a writer at Disney Animation, a lot of the times, what you're really doing is just trying to build a foundation or build a sandbox for others to play in. And I think that's a really critical part of something that you do as a writer at Disney Animation, for sure.
Well, the other thing that strikes me that's been a big part of your career is reading as well, because I go right back to the start. I think you were a script reader for Robert Zemeckis.
I was, yeah.
Weren't you? So, and presumably you're reading the work there of people who don't necessarily have the power to get noticed, and you've got just this tiny moment of influence, and it's kind of crucial you give them their attention. Can I ask, what do you remember of that time, and how important is that skill set to what you're doing now? Because it sounds like the two jobs are a million miles away, but also in a strange way, a bit closer than they might appear.
There's nothing more important to my career than my job as a script reader. When I first moved to Los Angeles, I actually started in a mailroom of a talent agency called Endeavor, and I went from there to Robert Zemeckis' production company. My job in both, among other things, poaching eggs was one of my jobs that I did as part of that. So I'm pretty good at both of these things.
Great.
I got one egg literally thrown at me one time, so apparently not great at it.
That's my clickbait story. Yeah, I worked for Robert Zemeckis and got an egg thrown at me.
Yeah. That was my job previous, so it'll be clear on that one. Robert
it's clickbait. You know how this works. That's just.
I get it. I know. I stepped into that one. Amy's gonna be very upset with me.
That's great.
So here's what I'd say. It's so important because there's always this sentiment that 5 pages into a script, you know whether it's good or not. As a script writer, you hear that all the time. You got to make sure that you grab people out of the gate. It's very true. Within 5 pages of reading a 100-page screenplay, you know immediately the style of a writer. You know whether that writing is quote unquote special or not. You know whether or not they're able to craft characters that draw you in, or a premise that is intriguing. You know that right out of the gate. And so when I first began my career, literally reading hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of scripts, it was the greatest education you could possibly imagine, because you could see where people very talented writers excelled, and you could see where 99% of what you read was just sort of the same or uninspiring. And that as someone who wanted to be a writer, it was so critical to know that, because many of my earlier scripts, 100% of my earlier scripts didn't have that fire. And so I'm really looking at it going, well, like, why are these stories more appealing? I really had to think that through. And I think the biggest thing was, it was confidence of writing. It wasn't something that really leapt off the page. Were people who said, oh, this is me on the page. I'm not trying to sell you this storyline. I'm showing you who I am I'm showing you my creative point of view. That was the most important part of that education.
So there's a story of on the set of Groundhog Day, and I can't remember the specifics. It's just triggered by just something you've just said there, where one of the most junior members of the, I think it was, they had a few days left of shooting. One of the most junior members of staff on the set put their hand up and said, actually, that wouldn't make sense. That they had the creative courage in that environment to say that wouldn't make sense. And I'm curious now, because and they listened to them and it didn't make sense, and they made an alteration to the film. So I'm curious your position now as Chief Creative Officer, that you were in the trenches with everyone a few years ago. Now you're you're the boss, right? You're in a company where the sweatbox culture has in the past sounded like quite intense. I'll go with intense. How do you, in that role, make sure that the shyest, quietest person in the room or on the Zoom call has the tools and the mechanism to put their hand up and say that doesn't work?
Well, I'd say, having been the quietest, shyest person in the room many times myself, I think it's really important to remember how that feels. And to be honest, I think any creative person sharing their views, it's always deeply personal, because you're saying things because of a personal experience, or an event in your life, or a part of yourself that you may not always show to other people in the workplace. So the most critical thing to do is to make people feel safe, that their opinion matters, because it does. I think this is one of the defining characteristics of Disney Animation, is it is a place where you have hundreds of people on a crew, and anyone at any point can give their opinion, and that opinion matters, and the best idea wins. That is not lip service. That's literally how we approach all of our stories. And our crew moves. It's not like the movie's done and everyone leaves. The same people then move to the next movie, and so on and so forth. And as you're moving through that, it's only possible because of the ideas and the care put into these stories by everybody. And so I think more than anything is making sure that people correctly feel valued, and that you make sure that there's room for others' opinions. Now, it's also, I think, the job of a director and a writer to be clear in terms of what the sandbox is that the movie is playing in, because you want to make sure that that you've told everyone what the tone is, or you've explained enough about a character's psychology that if they have an idea about it, that they're talking about the same character that you are, or an idea comes in and you need to adjust that character. So it's a two-way street for sure. But I think more than anything, it is making sure that the brilliant minds that you're surrounded by feel valued.
I should point out as well, since the last time we spoke, I think we've spoken once before, and I'm sure it's embedded heavily in your brain, and you can remember every nuance of it. Got it, bang on. You've not just been promoted, and you've also won an Oscar. None of which are down to me, I should point out. I'm just saying it's a coincidence that we've kind of got.
I know people are talking about it, Simon, so they know how it worked.
Right, but also, I mean, you've been through this quite incredible process, really. But the smallest version of this question, I think, is what does a Wednesday or a Thursday look like to you now? Because the version of you I spoke to like 4 or 5 years ago was directing, was writing, and was in the mix. And it's a cliche question, but like when you're queuing for your coffee now, is everyone a little bit nervous of you? Do you sense some degree of change?
It's a funny question. I have a lot of grounding elements in my life. The story room is a big one, which is it doesn't matter whose idea it is. If it's not good, you're going to hear about it. And that's something I think moving forward, it's really important, that you sort of maintain that objectivity. I'd say that this is true story, that I've been sort of having conversations about this new role for a bit, but when it became official, like that day that it became official, I got home to my house, and I have 2 dogs, and I won't tell you what had happened. Clearly one of them had some stomach issues, and that was my day. That was my victorious moment, was coming home, and I was like, right, this is my job, cleaning this up for quite a long time. So I'd say that there's no shortage of normal human business that I handle on a daily basis.
And not just human by the sounds of it, but
yeah, other things. But I'd say, in the office, something that as I mentioned before, that I really believe in is that we're all trying to make a great story, and that takes a lot of people working together. Not every idea is going to be great. That's actually part of the process. If people didn't speak up because they don't have a great idea yet, then we're never going to find it, and myself included. I think the ratio of like good ideas to terrible, it's not even 50-50, but it shouldn't be, because sometimes a bad idea will allow someone to think about something that you would never have found otherwise. So
it's the Andrew Stanton quote, isn't it? The fail fast, fail often. Yeah.
100%, and that's something that I think is important, but also that takes everyone also remembering that as you're moving through your day. So I'd say I'm very lucky at Disney Animation to be surrounded by people who have no problem telling me when a bad idea comes around.
I mean, you mentioned you went home to a dog. I dug out the original Moana press kit. And your bio in that is quite something, because it says you didn't just have a dog. I didn't expect the interview to go here. You've got an emperor scorpion, a ball python, a tree frog, an 80-pound pit bull, and you playing jazz bands on your trombone. Is all of this like? Is this your grounding? Is this like you're relaxing away from the office?
Yeah, I'd say I do like to be busy. As the writer side of my brain is experiences equal creativity. And so even if those experiences are difficult or disgusting, that's only help.
Ideally both. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I've read a few interviews with you. You've been asked a zillion times about the origins of Moana 2 as a television series and how it became a film. So it'd be very boring if I asked exactly the same question. Can I go a bit nerdier instead?
Let's go. I'd love it.
Because it's pretty well known that this was going to be a much longer form piece of storytelling, and now you've got it down to 100 minutes was kind of the version that I saw. And it's the writer brain really in you I'm kind of interested in there, because that's a lot to funnel into 100 minutes. That strikes me. That's just like, as an outside looking in job. You've talked about how in other interviews about how you had the core of the story and you kept the core of the story, but how brutal do you have to be with the rest of it? Because presumably you're getting rid of a lot of stuff that you really love to funnel into the bits that we got.
It's, I think, a little more complicated than that. I think that I think people assume. I'd say
that's
people
why
assume that
you've got the Oscar and I'm sat here.
Here we go. No, I'd say I think people assume, because I think they know the story of series to feature, that we had a finished series. We did not. We never did. We had outlines of what stories could be. So we never had 140 pages of a script, and we're going in there going, okay, well, these 5 pages have to go. We had the first half pretty well laid out, which is, I think, a lot of what you see in the feature version. We knew where we wanted the story to culminate, but that was never executed, which is great. And what makes this even possible is that it was still malleable enough that we could make adjustments.
Interesting.
I'd say, I've talked a bit about the idea that in the version where we had 5 episodes, 3 of the middle episodes focus on a character, and we would arc that character, whether that was Moni or Loto or Kele, would arc them in that specific episode, which is more of the episodic television approach, which I also thought was really cool and compelling. But I think Moana as this super brave, badass hero, having really to anchor the story around her arc makes so much sense, and I think is honestly something that people watching the film are going to love. That just meant taking those arcs and just stretching them in a way that allowed them to culminate in the third act with Moana, so everyone hits concurrently. I'd say the only sort of larger adjustments to make is Moana's low moment used to be quite a bit longer. An idea for one of our episodes was we actually ended an episode at her low point and didn't resolve it, which is something that, obviously in a feature, you don't want to sit in that for very long. That was probably the only, area that you go, okay, well, this is going to be different. But to be honest, I think that she's low just long enough in this movie now for Maui to lift her up, which is fantastic. And we never have gotten Can I Get a Chihu without that adjustment. And honestly, that's, I think, maybe my most favorite song in the entire movie. So I think, anytime you make an adjustment, which is part of our process, for every movie I've worked on, I have literally hundreds of drafts. So I think to your point, it looks nice in a headline that they had to make all these changes to go to series to feature, but feature to feature, meaning like screening to screening to screening, it's no less work in a weird way. So it was not an unusual part of our process to hammer something like that.
But also appreciating you don't actually build the film in animation till like the very, very back end of it, it doesn't mean that there wasn't weight in the words that you had, and that there are elements of this that, I mean, maybe you come back to them at some point in the future. I'm just curious, in the midst of all of this, I want to throw the names of some human beings in. Who you gave the job. No, don't be worried. Who were steering the ship, really, and I think it's right I name check them, that you've got, please correct pronunciations. So you've got Dana Ledoux Miller, you've got Jason Hand, and you've got David G. Derrick Jr., who are your directors on this. So my question there is, that group of you, because you've talked right throughout this about collaboration, you're all in it together. Was there a moment you knew? Was there a point where you just thought, hang on, we've just, because I mean, the story is what, Toy Story 2, when Pixar were making that, they got to a point where they knew, no, we've got the wrong form for the story. Was there a point where, just some point where it just niggled? It's just like, might have got it wrong.
I think what it was a little over a year ago, it's probably June of 23, somewhere in there. We screen our films or our series. The first time we're trying to do that multiple times, usually 6 to 8 times over the course of the 3 to 5 years it takes to make. And we kept on getting the same note internally, which was, we love this series. Why is it not a movie? Over and over. That was the number one note. Why is this not a movie? It should be a movie. So looking at that, you go, okay, yeah, obviously this could be a movie, and that's great. At the time, thinking about it as a series was another fun challenge, something that we hadn't done before. But I think that it was the why were people asking that question was something really interesting, something to dig into. And it ultimately was, I think, people wanted to feel the immense scope. That's something that only a feature can do. They could see how this could play out on an IMAX screen, and that's where they felt like Moana's story deserved to be. Something for me looking at it, you go, well, this could be a very compelling story regardless of medium. But if we want to put Moana truly up against something she's never faced before, you do need that epic scale. And then once we started really thinking about what that would feel like, the question of could we do it more turned into, oh my gosh, if we could do it, we could do this, this, and this. And between the effects of that storm at the end, that's something that multiple departments had to come together to make that even possible, and they so exceeded every expectation. I think more than anything is, once we started to get a sense of the flavor of the possibility of this, not just going from series to feature, but growing in epic scale, was something that really energized everybody.
I mean, I'm curious at the stress testing of it all, because I mean, again, from the outside looking in, the Disney process is almost quite legendary of just like getting everyone together. But it's just like, if I came in with, I don't know, a killer idea for Black Cauldron 2 or something like that, long overdue, straight to VHS sequel. I've got it all mapped out for you.
Great, I love it.
I mean, what is that stress test? What I mean, from the outside looking in, I know about the sweatbox, about getting all the brains together and just stuff. But if I have an absolute eureka moment and on whatever, how does it get through? How does it get found? If I'm not in that room even. So I'm coming back to this a little bit, but I find this, you've got 3 brand new directors to my eyes. And they've come through somewhere, and I'm just curious how you're finding these talents and finding these ideas.
I'd say in the thinking about Dave Derrick and thinking about Jason Hand, I've worked with them for years, a decade, and so lucky enough to spend time with them, not just in terms of their artistic talents, but knowing what they care about as storytellers. They were members of the story team, they're artists, and as a writer, we were in the trenches many times, and so I got a sense of what they cared about, which is really what's the most important thing as a director. Dana is someone who did come from outside of animation. I had the pleasure of working with her on the Moana live action adaptation.
I've heard of this.
And so immediately, she's a stellar talent, and someone who not all writers are this way, but she is an incredibly visual writer. So she is someone who, when you read her writing, she's directing on the page. Not everybody does that, or not everyone that does that is good at it. She is exceptional at it. And so early on, going, you know what, this is someone who can and should direct, is critical. I think something that a lot of folks don't know, in television, there's a role of showrunner. And a showrunner in television is typically the job of a writer. Usually the head writer is the showrunner. And so weirdly, the skill set of a showrunner in television is incredibly similar to the skill set of a director in animation. It's uncannily similar, like what you have to be able to do, how you have to interface with other departments, keep the whole idea, keep the whole story in your mind, being able to talk about that. So even though Dana was someone from outside of animation, that skill set was one that immediately allowed her to hit the ground running. So I think for all three of them, knowing that we had a lot to accomplish, having multiple smart brains at the same time is critical. Having multiple smart brains that you could divide and conquer, and one person may handle this department while another handled that, and everyone's in lockstep. It takes some well-planned choreography, but when it's done right, as they did it, I think together, they create something pretty exceptional.
Your industry, your side of the industry, the animation industry, is in some degree of flux. I mean, it's again fascinating from the outside looking in. And I came around your studios over a decade ago, I think it was, and you had on the wall there, it's always stuck in my mind, a map of the world, and everyone had to put a pin in from where they were from. So there was someone who was from the. Is it still? I'm curious about that map, because I mean, someone had put the Fortress of Solitude. So fair dues, top work. But there was an inevitable concentration in California that as much as you were attracting people from around the world, it was kind of zeroed in on this period of time. I'm wondering where the barriers to entry to this are now, because again, you're bringing new names through, and I think for those listening to this who are wondering, could I be that person? If I was to look at that map now, for instance, would it be so concentrated? If there's someone, I don't know, down in Belgium, I don't know, miles away from Belgium, who thinks this is my dream, how do they get to you? How do they get their pin on that map?
Well, it's something that we think about a lot, honestly, because I think that our stories have to resonate across the world. And making sure that you are attracting folks from around the world and bringing those perspectives is critical part of what we do. So I'd say we have amazing teams that are out there constantly looking for folks that are whether that is seeing someone's art from around the world and saying, man, this person has a very unique style and they would be great here, or oh my gosh, actually their style is so Disney in the best way. It would be amazing to have them here. Whether that is a writer from some other part of the world or songwriters. I think it comes down to making sure that is prioritized. That going out there and looking for talent, no matter where they are, is a critical piece of what we do. That fresh perspectives are something to be championed. Is something that's only. You only get those perspectives if someone's out there actively searching for them. You can't assume that someone's going to find you.
Well, you don't get world class too if you're not lateral, I don't think. Because I mean, going back to it, someone found your Mancation script, and I know we've joked about it, but someone saw something in the last possible place. Again, no disrespect, I've not read the film. It might be an Oscar winner, but someone found something in what you'd written. The look on your face suggests it's not, but let's go.
Look. I think for some folks it could be, for two people, great. Will be their Oscar-winning script.
Lovely, and those two people, I send them my love. But someone was lateral enough to find that, and I'm curious what you just said there. That you've got people looking it's not even people necessarily come to you. Your outreach is such that you're scouring. Am I fairly representing what you said?
Yeah, I honestly, I don't think that's necessarily unique to Disney Animation. I think that there's always this pursuit of trying to find unique talents. By the way, sometimes that comes from some of our artists that know someone, worked with somebody that was inspired by someone, and they are in, some other part of the world, some other part of the country, and that's something that they'll bring to our attention for sure.
Yeah.
But I'd say that, yeah, I think that's the strange thing I think about Hollywood in general, but certainly Disney Animation, is that there's this sense of, I just want to. I know for me personally, I just really wanted to work at Disney Animation. How do I do that? How do I make that possible? I'm desperate to go and work there. A lot of people feel that. At the same time, internally, I can say from my perspective now, it's like I am desperate to find new voices and new talents, and that's so exciting. So you have this interesting, massive passion that's actually happening on both internally and externally. And it really just takes smart people going out there and trying to bridge that and make people feel welcome. And then you also have to take chances. Sometimes you have folks that are unbelievably talented but don't have the experience that you may expect to find. That's okay. Sometimes working at Disney Animation, you get that experience on the job, and that's okay. So I think taking risks is also really important. And sometimes, some of the most talented people that you'll ever work with are folks that have never done that job before or never done it in that medium before, and you have to take those risks.
So you've done a load of these interviews, I'm sure by now, and this is a really spoiler-free podcast, which is why I'm relatively light on the film. But can I just ask? Can I just get you to do my job for me for a second?
Please.
Is there something great, terrific? Is there something no one's asking you about Moana 2 that you want to talk about?
Oh, geez, there's something about Moana 2 no one's asking me about,
or that you want to talk about.
Yeah, it's funny. I'd say that as we're moving through this story, I think that there's something in Moana's character that I find really fascinating. And I'd say that somebody like Moana, who kind of has to be a leader, but she's deeply empathetic. She's incredibly approachable. Sometimes she's like a super nerd, like she's a dork in a lot of things. Like I think, sometimes with Ali, it was okay, great. Let's go even dorkier. And she'd be like, perfect. I love it. I think that something that's lost sometimes to folks is how building these things is really a sort of a community, friends getting together. I think to me, coming into this sequel story, getting to work with Ali again, getting to work with Rachel House, getting to work with Dwayne Johnson, it's how much fun and joy these things are. I think at the end of the day, this is a massive movie that goes around the world, and people want to sort of tell the epic scale version of this. But I think that something that's honestly lost so often is it's so many tiny moments that make these movies what they are. It is so many little human moments. It is Ali like laughing and then does a snort laugh, and you're like, what was that snort laugh that wasn't even scripted is now in the story? Or someone woke up that morning and they had a moment with their family, or their small child, and that becomes an interaction between Moana and Samaya. So I think for all the planning and all the years and all the screenings that go into any of these stories, it's equal parts what happened that morning, and that stuck, and that becomes a moment that lasts forever. And those are typically really normal, everyday human things. And I think that's one of the things I love so much about Disney Animation, is that that's possible. And I think that most people probably wouldn't ever think that it would be so, everything is so deeply thought out and scripted. But it's so often just a combination of the folks creating it that are bringing themselves and frankly their vulnerabilities to the story and to the acting and to the art that makes these movies what they are.
Oscar-winning Jared Bush, the Chief Creative Officer of the Walt Disney Animation Studios, the Oscar-winning writer of Mancation and Adrenaline,
and save the date. This has been a delight.
right.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
And that was Jared Bush, the Chief Creative Officer of Walt Disney Animation Studios. Moana 2 is in cinemas around the world as this podcast is being released, and it brings to the end this particular episode of the Film Stories podcast. Just a few little bits in case I've not bored you completely. I'm on Blue Sky at Simon Brew. Film Stories is on Blue Sky at Film Stories. It's on Facebook at Film Stories Online, YouTube at Film Stories. Website is filmstories.co.uk, a clickbait-free entertainment website. But if you go to store.filmstories.co.uk, that is where you will find our new merchandise line as we try to keep the lights on at this mad independent film project of which we're very proud. You will find a bunch of unofficial Nicolas Cage merchandise there. You'll find a Film Stories Don't Do Snark t-shirt as well if you're particularly enamoured. God bless you. Store.filmstories.co.uk, where you can also buy our print magazines as well, all for sale there. But I think I'm outstayed my welcome, and so I'm going to leave you in peace for now. I'm going off to do your regular episode of Film Stories. Until then, you all look after yourselves, you all take care, and I'll be back soon. Bye-bye.